Our guest is a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist with over 55 years of experience. Today, he's here to share insights on the importance of mental health. Please welcome Dr. Larry Waldman. Dr. Larry, good evening to you.
Thank you, and good evening to you as well. I appreciate the opportunity.
Always a pleasure. Now, there's a million different things we can possibly do in this lifetime, and something definitely drew you into psychology. What was it that drew you to psychology in your earlier years?
Yeah, I've been asked that question many times, and even while I was in high school, I was drawn to the mental health piece, and I was fortunate enough to attend college at the University of Wisconsin, which is highly regarded as a place for psychology. Last time I checked, it was like fifth in the country, or in the U.S. at least, and so on. And there were exciting professors, and I found the literature exciting, and so on. And I, I became very infatuated with it, and pretty much decided that was going to be the field that I was going to make my career in, and I did.
And 55 years later, you're still here doing it.
Well, I'm at this point. I'm what I call semi-retired. I don't do any clinical work any longer. If I did, I would lose the tail of my insurance, if you will. But I still definitely keep my fingers in it. I teach graduate counseling classes. I speak around the country on various topics, primarily on practice development, private practice development, which I'm very familiar with. I coach young therapists on how to develop a practice that is thriving and remunerative, and so on. I also do a lot of speaking for the community. Um, I, I work with a number of people, basically volunteering, if you will, and I speak on marriage, uh, parenting, divorce, things of that nature. Um, so I also became a couple of years ago a certified yoga instructor, and so I offer yoga instruction at a community center and at my own condo on a weekly basis at 79.
And just warming up.
Right. Exactly.
In your early years of study, when you went to university, as you started to study psychology, what were some of those transformations that you started to experience yourself as you studied the literature?
Well, a couple things. Probably what struck me early on is that there are four different perspectives, if you will, in psychology, which even to this day do not get talked about very much. You know, briefly, there's of course the what we call the biological point of view, and when I talk about a point of view, what I'm referring to is the perspective on what's wrong, if you will, or right, and how do you treat it? Okay. So there is the biological perspective, which basically is the home of the psychiatrist, if you will, which believes that uh, basically you're healthy if biologically, physically, you are okay, and so on. On the other hand, you may be having problems mentally due to biogenic reasons, and therefore the treatment would be pharmacology. So that's one perspective that certainly was of interest to me. And all during my career, I worked very closely with psychiatrists. In fact, there were two of them that rented space in my office for the better part of 20 years. And of course, we exchanged patients and talked frequently about patients and so on. And I'm doing this like in a chronological way because the biological perspective, dates back to ancient Rome, and so on. That people had different biological issues. As we approach the late 1800s, of course, we run into the uh, analytic approach or the psychoanalytic approach that was, of course, promoted largely by Freud and his followers, which essentially says that who we become and so forth has very, very much to do with our childhood, because we are brought into this world naked and naive, if you will. I like to call it that. The child doesn't know what's right or wrong, good or bad. What they experience, they have to assume is real, is the truth, and that what they are living, the life they're living in, is the life everyone else is living in, because they certainly don't know any difference. So the child begins to learn what I refer to as certain truths about themselves and the world in which they live. So, for example, if a woman comes into my office, and when I ask her, all right, what brings you by? And she says, I just broke up with my uh, boyfriend, and it seems like I constantly choose men who are bad for me. What's wrong with me? Well, given the way she places her complaints, to me that would suggest we need to take an analytic view on her concerns, because more than likely, what we need to analyze or look at is her relationship with her father, if she even had one. Because, as Freud said, the first relationship you have with the opposite sex is with the opposite sex parent. And so, if, let's say, her father was an alcoholic, or cold, or absent, or demeaning, and so forth, what would a young girl of like 7, 8, 9 conclude? Uh, is this 8-year-old little girl going to think, oh, well, my dad's got problems. He drinks too much. He doesn't spend enough time with me. He's got a short temper. He criticizes me, etc. This is his problem, not mine. Of course not. No 7, 8-year-old child is going to have that kind of insight. It just isn't going to happen. What is going to happen is that the child is going to assume it's their fault. That's all any child would. It's them. Okay. And so you can see now what this, in this case, girl, what kind of path she's on. This is her first experience with the first man in her life, who basically is rejecting her and so on. Maybe not purposely, but that's the way it looks like and feels like and so forth. And therefore, as far as she's concerned, this is what you would have to expect from men. So there's an example there of this perspective and so forth. And again, the treatment would call for to get this now adult woman to realize that, one, she wasn't wrong, because just as I said a minute ago, any child under those circumstances would have drawn the same conclusion. But now, as an adult, we can draw different conclusions. We can look at the situation from a much broader standpoint and realize the problem was with dad and not with her. And that explains to a large degree why she finds herself comfortable with a man, frankly, who mistreats her. But it really doesn't work. And so, what she needs to understand, of course, is where this came from, and again, develop that insight, okay, and get on the right path and start seeking out men who are loving, caring, thoughtful, etc. So that's the second perspective. The third or the next perspective are called contemporary perspectives. They're more modern. And one of them is referred to as the cognitive approach. The cognitive approach was basically formulated early on in Europe in the early 1900s and so on. But basically, what the cognitive approach says is what you think is how it determines how you feel. Making it relatively simple in that what people almost don't realize is that we are speaking to ourselves all the time, not out loud most of the time, hopefully, but internally. We're saying things to ourselves. We're coaching ourselves, if you will. And what we say to ourselves is very important. I mean, if we approach something, whatever it is. Okay, let's say maybe we're going to go to a job interview, just for sake of argument. And as you are sitting there, waiting to be called in, for the interview, what are some people saying to themselves? Well, of course, it depends, doesn't it? Depends on their history, depends on what they've been telling themselves for a long time. It depends on their life experiences and so on. What they might be saying is, "Oh, I really hope I do well. I'm not very good at this. The last time I did this, it was terrible." And so on. And see, basically, they're negatively coaching themselves, and they they don't do well then. Okay, I call this stinking thinking, where people basically overthrow themselves. They 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 almost cause failure. I'll give you a good example. This is way back about 10 years ago. My son had just finished law school. He did very well, and he was being interviewed by various firms. But after like a couple of them, he wasn't given an offer. And he said, "I got another one coming up," and he said, "I really hope I do well on this one." And I went, Josh, you're sounding a little obsequious here, little mild mannered. You're looking to become a litigator, okay? Litigators aren't lambs; they're tigers, okay? And then I said, "Didn't you graduate near the top of your class?" "Yes." "Weren't you a top athlete with a scholarship?" "Yes." "Aren't you very hardworking?" "Yes." "Aren't you very loyal?" "Yes." Well, it sounds to me, if all that's true, you would be a very good person for that law firm. In fact, they would be foolish not to hire you. And that's the attitude I want you to go into that interview with. And that's the job he got. And he's now a senior partner at that firm 15 years later or 10 years later.
Interesting. With that example there that you shared, the words sounded positive. "I hope I do well." If we were going to read it out on a teleprompter, the words would say, "I hope I do well." But there was something about the tone. It was like the words and the tone didn't match. What is the importance of what we say and how we say it to ourselves?
Well, I would disagree with you just a bit. It's not, "I hope I do well." I know I will do well. That's different. And that's the attitude you need to go in with. Be, when he's a trial attorney, he's standing in front of judges and a jury and so forth. You can't be tentative. You can't hope you're doing a good job. You need to do a good job. And
So
that's
when we're coaching ourselves, we've got to
right.
get the words right. From "I hope," which leaves an element of doubt,
Exactly.
to "I know," which is a level of certainty
Right.
followed by or with the right tone.
Right.
Is that a better way to do it?
Absolutely. I'm going to do the best I know how to do, and I got this.
And I
Yeah.
think for most people, we talk to ourselves all day. My son is an external processor, and his brain and his mouth move at the same time. So I get a really good insight into what's happening there. But I also
Sure.
had a grandmother who was an external processor, and she would say things like, "You idiot." So she would make a mistake when she was sewing. She'd say, "You idiot." And I'd look at her and I think, I don't think that's a really good way to talk to yourself. Not understanding psychology, but it just didn't seem right. And for the years, I noticed it was a pattern. And it was
Right.
when I got a little bit older, I would make a mistake and it was like I had absorbed that language pattern.
You
Is
make a
that me
good
or is that my
point.
grandmother?
Well, but see, here again, this gets back to the analytic kind of view there just for a second. You as a kid, you know, you heard that, and again, as far as you knew, that's what everybody did. Now,
Mm.
as you got older, you recognized, no, that really isn't healthy, but still it sticks a little bit. It's really sticky because that's the, you remember we go into life, as a blank slate. That's the first thing that's written on it. We can erase it and write it differently, but it's a little hard sometimes. My own kids have told me, my own sons, I mean, they're adults now. One's going to be 50, the other one 47. Um, but they say to me, you used to say things to me, and I went, oh, that's such crap, or whatever I was thinking. And now I'm finding I'm saying the same damn thing to my kids, even though so there it is. Right.
So, with this analytical approach, you gave a really good example there. There was a series of questions that you asked your son that elicited a yes response. What was the importance of getting him to say yes?
Well, it was critical. It was, and again, this is the cognitive approach because what I wanted to do was to rearrange his thinking. Um, where instead of going in there hoping, and wondering, going in there like, hey, I got this. You need me. Okay, I will be an asset to this firm. That's how you go in there, and that's how you answer the questions, and so forth. And and that's what he did.
Because I noticed the pattern was ask a question, elicit a yes response, feed it back. And when Encyclopedia Britannica many years ago, when they designed their sales script, they brought in psychologists to design the sales script. And there was a series of about 42 questions called a yes set. And if the homeowner, after they knocked on the door, if the homeowner answered yes 42 times, they were virtually guaranteed to make a sale.
Sure.
But if there was a no, then the sale stopped and it exited. And and the very first question they would do, it was they would knock on the door, knock, knock, knock. The person living in the home would answer the door, and their first question was, "Do you live here?" And most people think that's an obvious question. Well, it is. The person who answers the door normally lives there, but it was the first yes.
Yes. Sure.
And it was
Yeah.
very
Start.
interesting to see that
Right.
in your questions here, just eliciting that yes response. But it was also a question that was easy to say yes to.
Right.
Didn't you get, didn't you graduate here? Didn't you perform here? Weren't you on the school team? Yes, yes, yes. And then
Exactly.
to feed it back. And with your years of experience, is it possible for individuals at the start of their journey to coach themselves? Can they do it at the start, or do they need somebody to coach them through that process?
Yes, good question. Yes, but it takes some introspection and some learning, reading, and so forth. Um, Absolutely. It is possible. Now, of course, it could be facilitated by seeing a counselor or therapist or whatever, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Um, but yes, it is possible if you are open to it. The problem is most people aren't. I'm fine. You know? Yeah. Well, maybe not, and so
My wife's studying at Arizona State University, and she's got one or two subjects left to complete her Masters of Psychology. And
mhm.
she was at a business meeting the other day, and she was just talking to people about what she did. And when they heard that she's studying a Masters of Psychology, the response was, "Oh, you must have seen a lot of sick people. You must see a lot of broken people." And I think one of the unfair things, in my opinion, is that people have to see a psychologist or a counselor because they're only broken. I think there's many times that you can go to a psychologist and it doesn't mean you're broken. When people seek the assistance of a psychologist, what are some of those events that have taken place, or what are some of the goals that they have for therapy?
Well, there are many, and you're right, and that's a good point. I mean, you don't have to be absolutely, like you said, broken down, having psychotic breaks, and so on, to see someone. It could be, again, relatively simple. Well, simple. Breaking up with your boyfriend or girlfriend, as the case may be. Why is that happening? The couple coming in saying we're not getting along as well as we would like to. We're arguing too much. Uh, we feel distant from each other. Things of that nature. Um, someone who might be a little shy, someone who's a little fearful for one reason or another, um, and such. Or many times I've had parents say, or particularly mothers say, I love my kid, but I sometimes don't like him, because he's driving me crazy or she's driving me crazy. I need some help with the parenting and so on. So it's basically like life skills, if you will, and so on. And that's a lot of what I did.
When I was growing
Um,
up, I remember my mum, she was visiting the psychologist. And what I noticed was that over time, her ability to manage her emotions significantly improved. Significantly improved. And then when I was maybe about 25, 26, I had a relationship breakup, and I was left kind of confused in the relationship. And I was thinking, I don't think there's anything wrong with me, but maybe I should go and speak to a professional and get some advice. Because the advice that I was getting from my mates is like, come on, let's just go out and have some more beers. We'll go party. We'll have some fun, get a rebound. I was like, well, I don't think I need that right now. I think I need some introspection, but I need somebody who can actually guide me through it, who doesn't really know me, but they can just take a perspective with all their case history. And I went and saw the psychologist. They asked me some great questions, and then they described the type of person that I'd been in a relationship with. And I went, yes, yes, yes. They said, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. This is what we call this type of personality. And then I thought, wow, that's interesting. I'm definitely going to come across that type of personality again in my life. What can I learn? And I learned some really good life skills from that. And my
Right.
psychologist said, Daniel, you're a good fella. For the next, you've been with the person 3 years, just have 3 months off dating. Just do some reflections. And it was a great 3 months. And I really, the pressure and the weight lifted off my shoulders. I was clear on the next step because although there was an incident that was challenging, there was still a goal. Like, hey, I want to find the right relationship in the future. And I want to make sure that for my next relationship, I'm not taking in any emotional baggage. I want to make sure that's departed. And if there is a blockage within me, how can I understand that so I don't face that challenge or potentially trigger it?
Right.
And that life skill served me really well.
Yeah, it's a good use of that. The divorce rate in the states is right around 48 to 50%, and so it happens a lot. And I used to see lots of divorced people, and and often I would ask, well, what do you think was the cause for this? And I swear, 90% of the time, all the fault was on the ex. Okay. Most of the time, and when you talk to people who are divorced, I think you'll find it to be the case. Uh, the reason for the divorce was the partner. And so what happens then is this person believing that, well, it wasn't me, it was him or her, and so on, and totally neglecting their role in this, in this, you know, at the very least, what they may have allowed to happen, or why it is you were attracted to that kind of person. Okay,
Mm.
that doesn't get discussed, and so what they do, of course, is in very short time they reconnect with somebody else. And what's interesting is the divorce rate for second marriages. Now, remember, people have already been through one, they're older, they should be wiser.
It should be.
Yeah. But the statistics show while first marriages fail at about 48%, second marriages fail at 65,
Wow.
2/3. Why? Well, because you're taking the same problems that doomed one relationship and putting them into another. I would advise all my clients who were just out of a an exclusive long-term relationship, to not, if they want to just go and have a party or whatever, but to not get into another exclusive relationship for a minimum of 9 months, and actually get into treatment and get real insight as to what role did they play in that divorce.
Mm.
It's essential.
Reminds me of one of my mates when we were growing up. He was good looking and he dated all the most gorgeous girls.
Sure.
And after 6 to 12 months, he always broken. And so we would go on this journey with him. He'd have a girlfriend, he'd fall in love, he's all in on the relationship, and then they'd leave him. And so after it happened once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, the boys woke up And they said, maybe the women aren't the problem. Maybe
Yeah,
he's the problem. And so we started to call him a serial dater, like a serial killer. He was just
yeah,
always in a relationship and there was no time to self reflect. And we were giving him advice as mates, like, don't you think you should slow down? Why don't you just have a bit of time off, come surfing? But it was straight back into the next relationship. And
right,
eventually, all of those girls that he had dated, all of our mates really liked them. We're saying, these are lovely girls. And then they'd leave him and they'd find another guy and they'd get engaged and married and stay together. And then the penny dropped. It was like, there's something within him that he hasn't solved. And he goes from relationship to relationship and he keeps repeating the same mistake over and over and again. And we couldn't see it from the outside. We're the boys. We're not seeing what's behind closed doors.
right.
And that pattern was so strong for years. The
Right.
serial data.
Sure. If I may, let me just finish this concept we talked about, the four perspectives. The final perspective is what is known as the behavioral view. Again, we had the biological, the analytic, the cognitive, and now the behavioral. Uh, the behavioral view, again, is a contemporary perspective. And basically, it says, who we are and who we become is the sum total of our behaviors and the consequences to those behaviors. And so, therefore, what we need to look at, is how is it we are behaving, and how are and what kind of consequences are we getting to those behaviors. um, Now, a good example of how I used that in my practice was to help parents manage their kids. Okay. And I used to ask parents, what do you think is the most valuable thing you can provide your children? And I would get, answers like, well, love, respect, um, money, whatever. Okay. And I would say, well, yeah, but to the child, what really is important, and now we're talking maybe, up to, from 2, 3, all the way up to 11, 12, or so, pre-adolescence. And ultimately, what they'd understand is what the most valuable thing parents can give to their kids is their undivided individual attention. Because without that, there's no guidance. And in fact, as we know, if they're infants and you don't give an infant some attention, uh, they can have a syndrome called failure to thrive and could even die. Okay. So the next question then is, if we agree that the most valuable thing we parents can give to our kids is our time and attention, when do you think you give it? And the data is pretty clear, because unless parents have been trained, or have done some reading, or have some real insight, what happens in most homes is that about 80 to 90% of the attention that kids get from their parents occurs immediately after the child has misbehaved. And when the child is in fact behaving, 80 to 90% of the time, what's the parent doing? ignoring them, hoping it just continues. Therefore, what happens? Remember, these are kids, as we talked about before. They don't know what's right or wrong, good or bad, what is normal, abnormal, or not. All we know is they want parental attention. And if they're getting parental attention 90% of the time behaving badly and not getting it when they're behaving well, what are we going to predict? Well, so what I often do when I'm working, with parents and so forth, is get them to reverse the paradigm, if you will. Catch the kid when he's good. Provide this valuable attention to the good behavior and less, of course, to the bad.
It's fascinating that you say that.
There's an
90%.
old behavioral saying that goes, it is far easier to behave your way into a new feeling than to feel your way into a new behavior. An example, for instance, I might be working with somebody, and one of the things they want to do is they'd like to get more fit or whatever, and I'll say, well, have you gone to the gym? Like you said you would, and so on. And the answer is no. I didn't feel like it. Okay? Well,
Those poor feelings.
Right to feelings, back to feelings, right. So here's the point. If people wait to feel like going to the gym, they may probably not. Now, I'll be honest with you. I'm in the gym at least 3 times a week, and I've been doing this now for almost 65 years or better, and so on. And I'll admit, there are some days, some mornings, I don't feel like going to the gym, but I do it anyhow. And now when I'm, get warming up on that, bike or whatever, or the stair stepper and so forth, how do I now feel being there? Can you guess? Good. So what did I do? I behaved my way into a new feeling. So instead of waiting for the time when I feel like doing what I need to do, I do it anyhow, and then I'm thankful that I did.
It was interesting you mentioned 90% of parents' attention is given after a bad behavior, and maybe 10% left over for when they have a good behavior. And I think
Right.
in a lot of our thinking in the world is it's like if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Well,
That
but in the
that's
system it is.
it's such an interesting
Well, I
approach.
call that the sleeping dog philosophy of parenting. If the dog is sleeping, leave it alone. Well, no, unfortunately not. Now if the kids are playing checkers nicely, the brother and sister are playing nicely, okay, right? And you look in and go, oh, that's nice. Isn't that nice when they can play together and so on? You're telling yourself that, but you back off. All right. 5 minutes later, there's a scream. And now what do? Now you run in. Oh, what's going on? Why didn't you walk in and say, hey, guys, I love the way you're playing so, cooperatively. It's great to see you, playing like this together. You know what? In a few minutes, when you finish your checkers game, let's go in the kitchen and bake some brownies. which you were planning to do anyhow, but now we're going to reward them for this cooperative behavior, you see. So now the kids go, oh, well, gee, I get complimented or praised, if you will, by playing nicely with my sister, and we get the baked brownies and have a brownie or two to boot. What a good deal. As opposed to, we're playing checkers, mom doesn't care, but if I make my sister scream, I know mom's going to come a running.
Stimulus
Who's in
response.
charge?
The kid. I think I worked with some of those kids. I used to work with Emirates Airline, and we would have a leader on the aircraft, and everybody knew that when you got on the aircraft and the leader walked around, they would catch you doing things wrong. So the leader would come, they'd tell you what you're doing wrong, and automatically, every time they approached you, you felt bad. And so when I had the opportunity to lead, I said, I might just do it differently to everybody else. And I would say to my crew in my briefing, I would bring them to the back galley. I'd bring 14 of them, and I'd say, on today's flight, I'm going to be walking around the aircraft, and I'm going to be watching you do your job. And I said, and when I walk past, I'm going to catch you doing things right. And they'd look at you like you were from outer space. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I said, well, your last flight, your senior flight steward walked around the aircraft and caught you doing everything wrong, correct? Yes. And I said, and how many times did they catch you doing something right? Never. And I said, good. Well, I'm just going to catch you doing things right. And if there's a shortfall in your performance, I'm just going to remind you what the standard is. And I know you have the skills to course correct. And people thought, wow, this is out of this world. But you'd compliment them and they felt so good. And then when there was a shortfall, I just reminded them and they could self correct themselves. And I never had a problem with people. And my life as the leader, as the temporary father for the next 14 hours, it was very easy for me. And it felt so much better. I didn't feel like I was some nasty leader. Hey, you're doing this. I want to write to your manager. It was a great flight. And that emotion seems to be contagious to the other crew. And so instead of the other crew misbehaving, they're all on their best behavior because they're going to get praise. They're going to get that attention that they never had in the job, but probably they never got it in their life.
Exactly. How many people, adults out there, are working in a situation where the only time they have any contact with the boss or manager is when there's a problem? Okay, think about it. Is that an environment that you want to work in? Is that a place where you're going to have lots of loyalty to the company? Where you're expected to when you do a good job, it's like, who cares? No mention. But as soon as you screw up, bam, bam, bam. No, you're going to stay under the radar. You're going to do just what you need to do to not be seen, and so forth. No one likes to work under those conditions. Well, why are we raising our kids that way?
And this new generation, I think they're pretty switched on because when I was with Emirates Airline and some of the crew felt they were being mistreated, they would say to me, Daniel, I'm going to treat the customer like the company treats me. Because they couldn't hit the company, but they could certainly make the customer's journey uncomfortable.
Oh,
And if they had a
sure.
bad experience, they wouldn't buy again. And so they would
Yes.
find ways to get back at the company. And that
Right.
was one of the common ones.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No one. Yeah, and like you said, you have a choice, but it's clear. If you're more willing to reward the good work or the good behavior, that's what you're going to get, and there's going to be less of it. You know, basically when my kids were relatively young and so forth, I certainly tried to catch them doing good things, and always noted that to them. But of course, they weren't perfect, and occasionally they were doing things that I didn't care for. But remember, um, at- attention is like, as I call it, like cash. You're buying the behavior you're going to get when you spend it. Okay, so if
Mm.
it's all bad, that's what you're buying. Well, I don't want to buy bad behavior. So when they would do something, mildly inappropriate, many times I just walk out of the room and I go like, where did that go? You know, well, let them fix it themselves, and so on. And then maybe I'd reoccur a little later, and I'd look for something else I could reinforce them on, and
Mhm.
get back on track, and so on.
As you mentioned, these um, four approaches, to me, from my perspective, with the behavioral approach, it's very easy to see somebody's behaviors. You can see what they're doing. But the cognitive approach, a lot harder. I can't see inside of your head what's going on, how you're
Sure.
thinking, your sequence of thoughts. But that behavioral approach, I can see with my eye. When people are resolving life issues and reinventing themselves so they can become better, is it a blend of these different approaches that they should seek? What's the best way to use those?
Well, perhaps, yes. Um, and in your point is well taken, except the example you gave with your grandmother, um, is one. I mean, she's obviously downing herself when something goes awry, but also just simply by looking at their behaviors. You know, why is it that some people don't do various things? Okay. I have, like my wife and I travel a lot, and we like to go to kind of out of the way places, if you will, and so on. And I have friends, in fact, who won't even go out of the states, and so on. Why? Because, frankly, they're afraid. Okay. Or why is it that people, stay in the same job they really hate? Oh, well, I think you probably know because they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to fail in the next one, right? So fear, and what fear is, of course, is stinking thinking. They're telling themselves they're going to fail. And when you approach something, with that mindset, I'm going to fail. Well, it was Henry Ford in early 1900s said, if you think you're going to do well or you think you're going to do badly, you're right.
As an
Now,
athlete, I know that to be true. My brother and I, my friends, were all wakeboarders. And if I was coming into the wake, about to hit the wake and do a trick, if I said to myself something like, I hope I don't wipe out, I hope I don't crash, I hope I don't get caught, immediately I knew I wasn't focusing on what I wanted. I was
right,
focusing on what I didn't want. And it
right,
was like I had cast a spell on myself and I'd crash.
right,
But when I got it clear in my mind that I was going to hit the wake, I was going to do my trick, I was going to land and ride away, like magic, like a spell again, I'd do the trick perfectly. And it could be the very first time. But it was
sure,
always the psychology that preceded my behavior on the board. And over the years, I realized that most of my fears were because of the pictures I was putting in my mind, seeing myself crash, telling myself I'm going to crash or I can't do it, or she or he's better than me. And I realized the sport was more of a mental game than a
Right.
physical game. I couldn't see
Exactly.
inside of other people's heads, but after a while, I figured it out. Okay, I've had this experience. I tell myself I'm going to crash. Henry Ford was right. Whether you think you can or you can't, you get to be right. And I struggled with that for probably a good 9 years. And then on the 10th year, I said, this is how it's going to work.
Right.
Competition after competition after competition, I won it. But it was the psychology. And even that final year in sports for me, although I was plagued with more injuries than I had been in the past, the psychology overrode the physical body and the pain. And I could see it and I did it. And that was
You
my
gave
experience.
yourself you gave yourself the same speech I gave my son before that interview.
Have you won a state championship? Yes. Have you been to the extreme games? Yes. Is your name Daniel Danger? Yes. Bang, bang, bang. It was like looking in the mirror.
There you go. Yeah.
It's
As I said, I coach a lot of young therapists, and of course I try to talk to them about effective marketing and so on. And many times I'll say to them, well, I was working with someone just recently. Was a young therapist, uh, and she her just getting started out in practice, and her one of her specialties was attention deficit disorder. And so I said to her, "So who's your marketing target?" And she said, "Well, doctors." And I said, "Pediatricians?" "Oh yeah, pediatricians for sure." I said, "Okay, so how do you think you want to address that?" "Well," she said, I guess I could get a list of doctors and knock on their doors and so forth." And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess you could do that. But that would take a lot of legwork and a lot of time and a lot of sitting in the office, waiting to get in and so on and so forth." And I said, "Don't pediatricians have meetings or conferences?" And she said, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm sure they do." And I said, "Well, when I was doing this kind of stuff, that's where I would go. I would speak to them at a meeting or a conference." And she said, "Oh, I couldn't do that." And I said, "What do you mean you couldn't do that? Stand in front of 50 pediatricians?" I said, "Why not? Just think about what this would do to your practice. You're up there as the expert, and you're seeing them 50 at a time as opposed to one at a time. Now, if you're telling me that you're not able to do this, well, what would you tell a patient of yours who's afraid to do something he or she ought to do?" And she
might
said,
have
"You're
to
right."
take a little bit of that own sweet medicine,
Exactly.
the mental medicine.
Yeah.
It's December 22 where I am, December 21 for you. And I think over the
For
next
another
half
28
an hour to
minutes.
go, 28 minutes, I think a lot of people are going to be reflecting on 2025, and then they're going to start to think about a New Year's resolution and what they can be, do, and have in 2026. And the topic of goal setting comes up. One of the things that I've seen, and it was backed up with some data from a company called Strava, is that uh, about 90% or more of the population who set a New Year's resolution quit before the 14th of January. And they like to call this Quitter's Day. So, one, we know goals are important to people or they wouldn't set them. But secondly, we know they set them, they quit really quickly. And one of your area of specializations is helping people set goals. For people who have set a goal but never achieved it, what's a new idea or a new approach they could take for 2026 so that they can actually finally achieve that goal and feel like they've had a significant win?
Uh, Obviously, it's timely and a very good question. Uh, when uh, and by the way, of these four approaches that I've talked about, uh, my favorite, it's not the only one, of course, I ever used, is the behavioral approach, because it is the most simple for the client to understand. So many times, often after on our first session, I'd look at the clock and I'd leave about 10 minutes before the hour, and I'd say, "All right, I think I got an idea of what's going on here. And let me ask you this question: how will we know when you're done?" And they'd look at me and go, "Well, I'd be happier." And I'd say, I have a sense of what that might be, but we need to be able to measure it. What does it look like? What would I see? What would you see? And they'd say, "Well, okay, I'd probably like to lose about 20 pounds or get into shape for. And I'd say, "Okay, I get a sense of that, but what would it look like? What would you do?" And so in the end, one of the goals would be, by the next session, you're going to go across the street, join that gym that you've passed for the last 6 years, never gone in.
And they keep
Join
taking
it.
membership money.
Yeah, join it. Get a trainer, and have your first session by the time I see you again. And frankly, if that doesn't happen, you can give me a call and we'll reschedule. And if it happens again, you can find yourself another therapist, because you're obviously not serious about doing what you say you want to do. And so what this really comes down to is set a goal that's achievable, but also measurable. And that's where people make these big mistakes. I'm going to be happier. I'm going to be nicer. I'm going to, whatever. Okay, nice, fine. Okay, how are you going to see it? How are you going to measure it? And I would go one step further and have somebody else, like your partner or a good friend, be the one to share this with and let you know if they're seeing you doing it or not.
It sounds to me here, it's like, what's your evidence procedure? And also, it's like you're waking up different parts of their brain. What does it look like? I think it was, I forget who said it, but they said if you can see it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand. It might have been a Jim Rohn quote. Also, what does it sound like? What are those conversations? It's like it's waking up all parts of the brain. What are you going to do? Bringing in the kinesthetics. How are you going to feel? What are you going to say to yourself? And I think if people can't see the end of the movie, or they don't have that evidence procedure, it's very hard to set that in a compass to that direction.
Right.
And I also heard there was like a double bind. You're going to bind them up. And the reward or punish. If you go across to the gym and you do it, you can come back and see me. But if you don't, then you're not serious. So either
Exactly.
way, they're going to prove to you and to themselves if this is important or not. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep. Frankly, some people go to psychologists or therapists and so forth to kind of excuse themselves. Hey, I tried. I saw a therapist. Yeah, okay. But it's not the therapist that's going to make you do it. You're the one that's going to have to do the work.
The coachee does the work.
Right. Right.
I think if we could all accept that, I know as a coach myself, I have that conversation with my people. I'm going to be here to help you get clarity on where you want to go. We're going to figure out where you want to be. We're going to figure out your starting point, and then we're going to coach in between the gap. But on the way, you've got to do the work.
Right.
And I don't think any sane person would expect the personal trainer to do the sit-ups for you. hey, PT, I want a six pack, but you've got to do the sit-ups for me.
Exactly.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work like that. But it's interesting that some people think that somebody else should be doing it for them, and as long as there's somebody to blame, my wife and I have a little joke sometimes when things aren't going well. Uh, we blame, and I say, doesn't it feel good to blame? We can blame all of these people, but at the end of the day, we're still responsible for it. And you get to that stage, you go, I'm responsible. I've got to do the work. And it's quite empowering. And if you just do it
Right.
once and you get a little bit of momentum, a little bit of wind in the sail, it feels good.
Right.
Just having those little wins. Well, 2026 is just around the corner, and people are going to set goals. And my thoughts on goal setting are that we should start by setting goals that we can guarantee success. And things like walking 5,000 steps, it's totally up to you. You can do it inside, you can do it outside. And if you can set and achieve a goal, then you start to get your confidence in goal setting. Okay, I've done it once. Good. Now just do a little stretch. And I like to use a 1% formula. Okay, if you can go from to 5,000 steps, just set another goal to go to 5,050 and just do a little 1% better so you can start to believe that it's possible. And the reason why I got to that was when I was growing up, I was taught to set these big, hairy, audacious goals. It had to be a BHAG. It had to be a 10x goal. If your goal's to earn $50,000 this year, you should 10x it, and it should be $500,000. And what I found was the goal was too big too soon. And even before I started, I felt like I was sabotaging my own success. I was in my head going, this is not realistic for me and my starting point. I don't have the experience to get to 500K. I don't have the skills, but it was driven into me. Big, hairy, audacious goals. Shoot for the stars and you might land on the moon. But I felt like a failure the whole time. And I was like, this is not going to work.
Right.
But when I had a different mentor and they said, well, what did you earn last year? 45,000. Well, do you reckon you could get 10% beyond that? Oh yeah, 10% for sure. I could do another 4,500. That'd be easy. That's one deal. Well, that's the goal. And once I got the goal, I got the confidence. My mentor would say, well, what's the next goal? Well, if we can do 50, why don't you set it for 55? And it was just that constant little stretch. And by the end of it, the income's gone from 45 to 75. And it was a massive jump, but it was just incremental. And my psychology was more positive. It was like, I think I can do this. I've done it once. Now I know I can do it. And then the third time I was like, this is absolutely certain. I'm going to smash it. And that was a lot better for me. So I think for people who are setting goals this year, set something that you know you can achieve and then just little incremental stretches from there.
Nothing like positive reinforcement to increase the behavior.
I've got my golden retriever here under the table, positive reinforcement saying you're doing a good podcast. Dr. Larry, where can we learn more about you and more about the books that you're writing?
Well, thank you. My website is topphoenixpsychologist.com. I've got actually, I've written 8 books, and some of them may pertain to some of your audience. The one I've referred to a fair amount is the first one is Who's Raising Whom? That's the parenting book for ankle biters, so younger kids. The second one is Coping with Your Adolescent. Obviously, as I like to say, if you haven't read the first one, you darn sure going to need to read the second one. The third one is How Come I Love Him But Can't Live With Him? That's
We know what that one is.
Right. The fourth one is Too Busy Earning a Living to Make Your Fortune. In fact, I made some references here, why people hold themselves back and so on. Fifth one is entitled Overcoming Your Negotiophobia. I did that with a co-author, a business analyst. Let's see, the seventh one is a book entitled Love Your Child, Love Your Child More Than You Hate Your Ex. That's for parents who are divorced or thinking of divorce or going through a divorce, and ensuring that they don't traumatize the kids in the process. And the last one that came out about 9 months ago now is entitled Silver Sex, Insights into Senior Sexuality.
Sounds like a book for every stage of our life.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Well, I've lived through them, so that's where, you're right, that's where they come from.
Dr. Larry, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it, and thank you for the opportunity.